Again, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box at the right side of your screen, and I will be managing that. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Martha Solons. Martha?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sophie, and welcome to all of our participants today. So as Sophie said, today we are going to present a webinar about developing your farm-to-school proposal. And we're not going to go into a lot of depth on each particular grant program underneath this request for applications, but what we want to do is give you some best practices in grant writing, and then that will be followed by some resources that Spark Policy Institute has pulled together for your benefit. So without further ado, one of the things that we'd like to start with is looking at the priorities for the 2016 Farm to School Grant Program. And we want to start with that because this is where USDA is looking to target its investments in farm to school. So we just wanted to call your attention to these. And they are really looking to prioritize projects that feature innovative procurement strategies. And so those might be setting up contracts or bid strategies, sourcing products from growers, also projects that bring local or regional foods into school-based programs, so particularly to improve nutrition in child care and educational settings focused on pre-K through 12th grade. And then projects that are broader in nature, so that reach more than one school, so they have a much greater impact. And lastly, projects that are built on existing farm-to-school projects, and those could be ones that either expand a project that is currently ongoing or develop a new aspect to an existing project. So those are the 2016 priorities, and being a little bit more knowledgeable about those will also help you write a stronger grant proposal for this year. So then another first things first is that make sure that your organization or entity is eligible to apply. And so the 2016 RFA clarified a couple of things. Eligibility of the lead applicant was one of those. And so you can read through that RFA, but make sure, that the lead entity is not a college or other institution of higher learning, extension service, any individuals or hospitals. So what you're really focusing on are eligible school food authorities, state and local agencies. The entities that are not eligible as leads can certainly be great partners or collaborators. Note that the deadline is fast approaching, and so you do want to keep that in mind as you're pulling your grant materials together. Next aspect is keeping track of the activities that are allowable under each particular grant. And so there are 4 under this RFA, 3 that we'll discuss today. And so make sure that the activities that you feel will help you advance your project are also ones that USDA is willing to invest in. And last point is note the funding, kind of the allowable funding amounts for each grant program and the fact that they do require a 25% match on all of these grant programs. So do keep that in mind. So a little bit about the narratives, because this is a really good place to, for us to anchor as we're looking at how to develop a strong grant application overall. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about these narratives, but the key thing to take away here is that there is a certain structure. And one of the things that is really important in developing any kind of a grant narrative is setting the context. And so each of these grant programs has a specific context that they would like for you to set. And so for planning grants, which are structured really at just getting started and kind of testing the waters in farm to school, they are really interested in knowing what your kind of school district demographics is, your background in farm to school, and then you can build out your project in terms of the need for it and other factors such as, what your specific implementation will be, how you're going to manage your project, who will be responsible for each step, and so forth. So just keep in mind that the narrative, the way they've set these up, is also really helpful in how you're going to demonstrate both the need as well as your ability to carry out the project. Now, for support services grants, these are structured a little bit differently, intended for agencies or entities who are looking at building on an existing initiative, and maybe they're looking at further developing one aspect. So there is some background information that they ask for you to provide. And so here, they're really looking at you developing and explaining your experience in Farm to School and the lessons that you have learned, and then why this grant program will help you build on that. Then the overview of the project focuses on those partnerships, so they're going to be looking for evidence of community support, and then the specific activities and the timeline evaluation plan. And then, of course, every grant project here does have a component for quality assurance and staffing, and we will discuss that in a little bit. Then lastly, under implementation grants, looks relatively familiar in terms of structure. These are really for scaling up or further developing an existing initiative. And so again, your experience specifically in procurement, in promotion of a farm to school project, and what you have done to date, how you have managed and evaluated that program is going to be really critical in terms of building out the need for the project and how you will be managing that project. So again, just a little bit of background information from which you will build your project ideas. And that's where we're going to start then, is really starting with your ideas and developing a roadmap that will help you organize where you want to go with your project and help you envision how you will get there. And that's really the critical piece here, because what you want to do is build a grant proposal that's going to articulate your idea well, and then also help reviewers understand what it is that you want to bring to the table and why you want USDA to invest in your project. So over the next couple of minutes, what we're going to do is walk you through this process of going from your idea, which is an identified need or a problem, to how you're going to propose to address or solve it, and then into the goals for that project, how you will actually implement that project, measure implementation, and how you're going to manage all of the parts of that project. So this is very sequential. We also would like to introduce a reality check in there so that you can stop and consider if the project that you're developing really fits in with what the grant requirements are and what your organization and your partners are able to complete. So let's look at a few project ideas. And so these are ideas that we can refine then, and they can be, for example, you might start with a need that you see in your community, pilot activities that you'd like to launch, or new partners you'd really like to bring to the table. So if we look at number one, the kind of broad idea behind that is a need for outreach on nutrition with a certain targeted population. And so you might be refining that to developing K-5 curriculum to educate low-income and underserved minority students about the importance of healthy eating. Or you might be looking at, as a broader idea, new ways to introduce local foods, and that might be by developing 10 new student-tested menu items that are based on locally sourced fruits and vegetables. Or lastly, maybe you're looking at the need in your community for a central shared location that would enhance the ability to integrate local foods in school meals across multiple schools and districts. And so that may be collaborating across those districts to refurbish a cold storage facility and invest in processing equipment. So again, you know, we're just looking at these broad ideas and refining them into the scope of one of these grants. So moving through this then, we want to take that and really make it very specific and actionable, okay? So we want to develop goals that describe what the project will accomplish and who will be helped or impacted by this project. And so let's just use as an example developing K-5 curriculum to educate low-income and underserved minority students on healthy eating. So at this point, we can then begin to map out what that particular proposal might look at. And again, this is just an example. So the next step would be developing some objectives that help achieve that particular broad arching goal. So those are going to be specific actions, and you will be thinking as you develop those that you need to be able to measure them too. So they need to be actionable, measurable, and then they're going to also be in sequence and describe, you know, how they will actually help you achieve that broad goal. And so just and in what time frame. So a couple of ideas might be designing field trips to engage students and build their knowledge about local food production, or using the school garden as a platform to teach students about how garden plants grow and provide nutritive value to their meals. So you go from that goal into objectives, and then you can begin really mapping out the rest of your proposal. So from there, as you've started filling out this roadmap and you've provided the context, goals, and objectives, the next thing you really need to look at are the resources that you're going to need to accomplish the goals and objectives that you outlined. And so these resources are going to be both your own organization as well as any organizations that you partner with. And so, for example, required resources might be, for the example that we were just talking about, might be partnering with farmers in the community to help arrange these educational field trips for students. Maybe staff time of your school garden coordinator, supplies from the garden, someone who's going to be responsible for the overall project administration and fiscal management. Those are all resources that you're going to need, and you can put a value on those, certainly, to help support you bringing this project to fruition. So the implementation step then, which is next on our list, refers to those very specific actions or programs that you'll do under this grant, and then the timeline that you propose to do them under. And so this is really your work plan. Then next are your outcomes and impacts, and this is where you want to describe what you anticipate your project participants will accomplish or what they're going to benefit from based on the resources that you use to carry out that work plan. And so you're really going to need to develop specific measures that help you show that changes occurred or there were impacts to your project participants or some situation change. For example, you taught 500 low-income and underserved minority students how to plant, care, and cook 10 new vegetables during the school year, and that resulted in a certain outcome. Say maybe they requested vegetable starts and recipe books. So these are just some general ideas, but you can see how we've gone from a broad idea into something that becomes quite specific and implementable. So in developing goals, be thinking then, what is it that we want this project to accomplish in very broad terms? Are we looking at a change in behavior, for example, such as increased consumption of fruits and vegetables in the school? Are we looking at a new process, maybe a collaborative bid strategies across multiple districts that would result in a greater number of school districts working together? Are we looking for something very specific, such as constructing a school garden? Just be thinking about what is that overall goal, and then how it will help your project and organization, and then reflecting back to those priorities, what's the broader impact? How could it help maybe catalyze other projects or other organizations? In your area, in the state, those would be very good elements to include in your proposal. So then lastly, for this section, as you're formulating those goals and you're starting to make them more concrete, be thinking, of the specific problem that you're your idea will help to solve. So again, are you trying to help children increase their intake of fresh fruits and vegetables in schools, or trying to increase overall produce sourcing in your area? Who's going to benefit from that program? Will it be school children? Because again, you're going to be looking at where you will be measuring impact. Will it be fruit and vegetable producers in the area, or the food service workers? Overall, what will your project accomplish, and how are you going to measure that? So again, you can look at those beneficiaries and think, well, will it result in school children choosing more fruit and vegetables at the salad bar, and you might measure consumption at that point? Would you be offering more fruits and vegetables throughout the day in different meals, and you might measure increased intake in that manner? But make sure in any case that you have a methodology in place that you can describe, as well as resources to measure that change that you are proposing or you expect will happen as a result of your project, and then be able to put that into your grant proposal. So next, we will look at some tips on how to get all of these ideas in writing, and I will pass this over to Dawn.
Okay, if everyone can hear me, just type if you can't, but I think I just took over the controls. I'm Dawn Filmony, also from Colorado State University. And just as Martha spent some time telling you how to frame your project well, we also want to spend some time telling you how you fill in that narrative and do as effective a job as possible so that that great idea that you just framed gets communicated well to a grant reviewer. Always try to keep the hat on of a reviewer. They're not going to know your district. They're not going to know your story. So in a few mere pages, you have to really reflect your ideas and how you plan to carry them out effectively. So we're going to go through writing tips a couple times throughout this, but what we would tell you, and you can read some of these yourself, is that you always want to make sure you go through the narrative a few times and make sure where possible you're using good sources and statistics for why your district has a particular need or a particular opportunity. Make sure to describe the assumptions you're making about why that great project you just framed is going to be effective in meeting the outcomes that you've laid out. And we're going to go through some very specific examples now about how you might describe what the return to the granting agency, in this case USDA, is, and how you're going to use a staff and a work plan to undertake your activities to meet those goals. We also tell you to check the narrative throughout, no matter which section of it, and make sure you're using as specific of language as possible. And in some cases, you can be specific in a bad way. We always caution people towards using overly dramatic language, I guess is what you'd say. There's rarely any time you need to say that all of something, none of something, every of something is happening, a problem, an opportunity, because people are going to assume that that's probably an exaggerated statement. So if you want to guard against making generalizations and bold statements, we always try to coach people that you want to talk about prevalences of something, the majority of something, great evidence of something, but just be very, very careful not to be too bold in your language. So what do we mean by specific then? Well, here is an example of how you might, on the left-hand side, start by brainstorming some things you want to do with your farm to school program, then how you might refine it to get more specific. But what we'd really like to see when we're reviewing these grant proposals is getting as specific as possible about what you really, really envision could happen in your school district. So teaching the public might become more specific when you talk about really trying to inform parents, and that might yet become more specific by talking about crafting educational programs that link parental food choices to child's health outcomes. So what you see there is a brainstorm on the left in each of these three examples, becoming a little more specific when you start making your work plan. And quite honestly, we'd like to see it be very specific, like the examples we give on the right-hand side, by the time you're actually trying to do that evaluation of the outcomes and impacts that Martha mentioned, because otherwise you're not going to have enough specificity to actually measure whether you got to the place you'd hoped to with this grant. So what are the next parts of the narrative that you should focus on after you have those great goals and potential outcomes framed? Well, you really want to try to put together an implementation plan, and this is really what you consider the meat of the grant proposal. Why do you need resources? What manpower or other types of inputs are you going to put on the ground to make your project successful, and who are the participants, both those who are going to benefit from the Farm to School program, but also those team members and partners you're going to use to carry out the actions. So although this is only going to be as good as the goals that you originally envisioned, this meat is the really important part, because it really is the accountability and defensibility of why you should be given money by to do this project by the government. We also suggest in the implementation plan that you either list the partners you already have, or if you don't have partners, think really hard about what that might signal to the granting agency. It's rare that an organization or school district or set of parents actually has all the skills that are needed to carry out one of these projects. And if you don't have partners, you need to do a very thorough job of talking about how your organization alone has the capacity to complete the work that's just been listed in your implementation plan. And particularly in a couple of these, I know there's several grant programs here, but in several of those, it looks like actually expanding to new partners is something they want to encourage and that you might actually gain points for doing. So again, we can't emphasize enough the important role of partners, and although it's hard to make that money get spread too thin and be shared across too many people, we always think partners are a good idea in strengthening a proposal. So let's go back up to some 100-foot level writing tips. At this point, after you've done your implementation program, we do ask that you go back and reflect on the narrative. Have you been innovative? Have you been passionate? But while you've been innovative and passionate and thought really big about creative things you can do to make your Farm to School program be impactful for as many people as possible, we also do suggest that you do a reality check and make sure that you're specific enough and realistic enough with what you plan to do, that it's something you can undertake in 1 or 2 years, depending on the length of your grant. And so it really comes down, do not promise what you can't deliver. Although it will be possible that you can hit all of your dreams, I think any grant review team really is looking for, are these grantees biting off a chunk of work that's actually quite possible in a year or two, knowing that their dreams or their aspirations might be far bigger, but that if this pilot project or this first step goes really well, they can come back and request more money in the future. And in fact, some of these grant programs under the Farm to School program suggest that they are for grantees who have had their first successful project and are looking to expand. So all we're saying here is that make sure you don't overpromise what you can't deliver, knowing that if you deliver well on a smaller scope of work, you probably will be eligible to apply again. And so that's just summarized here in words again, and make sure that the scale of your project reflects the budget and resources you have, the number of people you have, and the partners you have. Finally, we always, as reviewers, when we're on panelists, look for if there's been a good job of laying out what the real impacts are going to be, and if that matches to how you're going to evaluate the project at the end. Sorry, I'm going through these quickly. I just want to make sure we get to Lynn as well. So crafting impact statements is really truly an art form. You don't want to just state the activity that you plan to do. You want to relate that activity to what again, you envision will happen in your set of students or in your school partners after you've taken those activities on. So here's a couple of examples again, and in the next slide we actually get a little more comparative. So on the left-hand side, we show an impact statement. We want all of our vendor farmers and producers to have GAP training, and that will increase the use of GAPs by those vendors by 30%. Well, that's an easy thing to evaluate. You actually go back to the vendors who are working in your Farm to School program and conduct a follow-up survey to ask if they've gone through GAPs training in the past year. A second impact statement you might make is that you want your kitchen staff trained so that they can prepare 10 key menu items from scratch, which again allows you to use more farm-based goods. And again, the evaluation technique there is that you actually literally can just do a count that 100% of the staff did go through a training session sometime throughout the year on those 10 new healthful items. And finally, you might want to say that you have a new menu item that will lead to 25% increased school lunch participation because some of those new from scratch items are more attractive to your student body. And that, again, you can evaluate by offering to do school lunch participation analysis of numbers, pre and post menu change, and how those numbers relate to the days on the menu that those from scratch offerings are scheduled. And again, this might feel like you're getting a little bit into the weeds, but those are the exact types of indicators that the government is looking for you to share, that something you did in your activities actually led to the outcomes you'd hoped for. And again, at the end, you might want to take a final look at the project, going back to some of those writing tips about if you're clear enough, you're specific enough, you're realistic enough, and you're engaging enough with your language. And again, my apologies for going through this so fast, but we wanted to hit the highlights, and I want to leave some time for Lynn. I did offer some slides here on how you might put together a staffing plan and estimate cost on how to implement that staffing plan you can look at, and you're welcome to follow up with me if you have questions on that. But I am going to turn it over to Lynn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We realize that we have thrown a lot at you, but it's all okay because we are going to be sending these slides out to you. And so for everybody who is on this webinar, you'll get an idea, and you'll get actually the notes too that we have been using with the slides. So I want to tell you about the kinds of resources we have available to help you beyond the great advice that you just have received and can look over in detail on how to write a strong grant narrative. We also have a couple of different things that can help you in addition. So no matter what kind of grant you're seeking, a required element is going to be addressing how you evaluate your progress. And Dawn and Martha touched upon this, but I want to tell you about the Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit. So we have a toolkit that's available, and it came from the Colorado Farm to School Task Force and Spark Policy Institute. This toolkit is a very, very good resource, and it was developed specifically for those people who are doing farm to school and those people who aren't evaluators. So the different audiences that are really going to find this the most useful are going to be those who are actually involved in farm to school activities now. So you could be a school garden leader, you could be a food service director, you might be a science teacher or a parent. Again, you don't have to be an evaluator to use this toolkit. And this is going to be really great if you happen to be applying for a planning or implementation grant. It's really going to help you be able to identify how and what kinds of activities and outcomes you want to measure, as well as give you the resources to do that measurement. Many farm to school programs are supported by community partners. And so if you're one of those support service grants, please use this toolkit. It too will absolutely help you. And then finally, I would just mention, we actually end up with folks who are seasoned evaluators. It turns out that the toolkit is actually quite useful for them too, because it provides very good guidance on the types of outcomes that would be expected into farm to school, as well as the type of data collection tools you can use through this toolkit. So just real quickly, there are different types of steps that we have in the toolkit that literally walk you through how to create and implement your evaluation. We have a downloadable evaluation plan template. We have 7 attachments that focus on different target populations and existing data collection tools. We also have a webinar training that supports each of the steps, and it's available online. And we also have 2 more items, which is that there is a peer-to-peer forum for attendees, and anyone who wants to use that can join it. So another thing is that I want to point out that particularly for those of you who are doing an implementation grant, you are going to need to address how you're promoting your program. Well, it turns out that we have just released the marketing toolkit here on our Colorado Farm to School website. And so I encourage you to go and take a look at that. This is actually just a screenshot of the first page of our marketing toolkit, and you will see that it's pretty straightforward. It literally says start here, so that's where I would put you, start here, because that will give you some basic resources to get you going. And then you'll see that we actually have different audiences that you want to reach with very specific types of promotion materials and templates that you can use. The last thing I want to point you to is that we have created for this year's USDA Farm to School grant application 3 different grant narrative templates for each type of grant. So for the planning grant, implementation grant, and support services. The first 2 pages of each of these templates provides just some basic instructions relevant to the narrative. So for example, what is the formatting, when is the submission deadline, what are the award amounts and duration of the grant. It also includes the USDA funding priorities generally, as well as their funding priorities this year. Importantly, you can see at the very top of this document that I'm showing you, the front page, in the note section, the second paragraph, this is really important information. It basically says, you must obtain your DUNS number and you must register in the SAM system. I cannot emphasize more strongly how you should do that right away, because you don't want that to be your hang-up. These are just, you know, kind of those hoops you have to jump through. Just jump through them right now. Even if you think you're not really sure you're going to do it, just go ahead and do that part, because there is a delay in getting all of those together. And then here is where the most useful component of our template is. This is in a Word document, and each template starts really on page 3. So the instructions are page 1 and 2, and then on page 3 what we have is an outline of the narrative for each one of those different types of grants. And this is what it looks like. It literally has each narrative section already bulleted out for you. And then it goes ahead and over in what we call the comment card in a Word document, it will list from the RFA exactly what are the instructions that you are supposed to be following for what goes into that narrative section. So we put it right there, so it's right in your visual frame, and you can go, oh, yeah, okay, so I'm supposed to do this, and I'm supposed to do that, and I'm supposed to do that. And so you know, you don't have to page through 40 pages of an RFA to try and find out what piece goes in there. And then the final thing we do on each section is we also include what's called the scoring criteria. This is what USDA will use to determine and to basically, you know, grade your application. And so to make it as easy and straightforward as possible, we put the scoring criteria right there for that particular section. So you can literally say, oh, yeah, have I really demonstrated a clear understanding of my basic understanding of farm to school? And if you figure out that, oh, you know what, we didn't really address that, you know you need to address it now. So that's what these templates look like. They're super easy to use, and we hope that you will actually use them because they will make your life a lot easier. Also, I want to point you to that we have additional supports. For example, we did create a review and a compilation of the different types of grants and what were awarded last year. This really just gives you an idea of what kinds of things is USDA funding, and that's actually kind of helpful. And then finally, of course, you must go to the USDA website. They have tremendous amount of resources. Obviously, the RFA is sitting there. But other things that they have done that you'll want to pull down if you haven't already done it is listen to their webinar and their PowerPoint slides where they have gone over this particular funding cycle. It goes into the detail of the grant itself. All that we've tried to do here today is provide you with resources for how to do your narrative component better. There's a whole bunch of other components that you really need to be up on, including the budget and all of that. And so you need to go and look at that slide, and they have a great webinar on that. With that, I'm going to basically end it and open it up for Q&A, but I want to emphasize one thing. We have a survey that will come up automatically when this closes. I want you to fill it out because for those of you who will fill it out, we actually have a few questions that will give us the ability to target resources to you better. And so by completing this survey, not only will we learn how well or not as well did we do on providing this information in the webinar, but also we will get a little bit of information from you to better know what kinds of additional resources we can send you, as well as which of one of these templates, if any, you would really like to have, which one of the grant narrative templates. And with that, if you have questions, please start typing them into chat. Thank you. So we'll give you a little bit of time because, of course, it takes time to type them in. Please do select all panelists because we can't necessarily see everything. what we will do is speak them out, and Sophie will probably copy them back in as the host of the webinar. She'll copy them and put them back in so that we can see them in case some of them came in not with all panelists. So I'll throw out a couple. So I would love to know if anybody wants to share. If, you know, tell us what kind of grant you think you're going to apply for. Just because it's really interesting to see the different types. So our types are, just a reminder, a training grant, or I'm sorry, you'd think I'd have this. An implementation grant, a support services grant, or a planning grant. So if you want to tell us that you're doing that, or want to tell us that you've already started, here's somebody who says they're going to go for a planning grant, so that's terrific. Planning grants are, I love that USDA has planning grants, because so often, you know, you're at this point where you're ready to actually get started, but unless you've got some resources to support that get started, that planning component, you really just can't even get off the ground. So, you know, kudos to USDA for providing support for the planning. And I'm really glad to see that somebody's going to go for a planning grant. So Dawn mentions, because I'm the only one who has audio right now, that she really agrees. Planning grants are a really good stepping stone, and they are such a good stepping stone. Oh, can more people talk?
I've unmuted both Martha and Dawn so that
terrific.
all panelists can talk. Yep.
Okay, great. So I see another person's going to do support services. So I'll just say to that person that the Colorado Farm to School Task Force did get a support services grant, and they got the grant to roll out their Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit that I quickly overviewed, to roll it out nationwide through both in-person trainings and webinar trainings. Any questions? We do have a, go on.
I would just say if you were advised to go back for an implementation grant, we highly recommend it. These are really competitive programs, and sometimes it's really hard for the panel to say no to someone. They just run out of money. So if they encouraged you to come back and they know what their funding levels are, yeah, definitely do. I mean, refine whatever you can and make it stronger if at all possible. But if they're inviting you back and encouraging you, definitely go back. There's many examples of people who got funded on a second round that didn't on the first.
I agree, absolutely.
Oh yeah, okay, so you got a planning grant. So now you're going for an implementation. What I think all of us would agree with who've been on these panels is anytime you can get really specific about what the planning grant helped you to achieve, including don't be embarrassed at all if you had to change course a bit because some things didn't work out exactly how you wanted, but be as explicit and specific as possible about how well you used the money they gave you in the first round to set you up to succeed well in the second round. That's the pathways they want you to lay out for them. Lynn, did you have something to say too?
No, I think that that's absolutely right, and it is exactly the kind of thing that actually USDA likes to be able to demonstrate. That, you know, it's really worthwhile to invest in planning grants, because look at what happened. Because, you know, this district did a planning grant, they're now all well prepared to do an implementation grant. So it's kind of a win-win situation. If you can do a nice, strong implementation narrative that connects back to how the planning grant really got you prepared for it, it makes USDA feel good too.
And for Laura, well, I know at least Weld School District is doing a processing kitchen for local fruits and vegetables, and a really creative thing they're doing up here, this might be happening other places, is Jeremy basically let a farmer go into his kitchen, and if the farmer brought some of the labor, what they kind of did at an exchange, the farmer helped them process some of the sweet corn, then in exchange for their labor and product, they got to take some percentage of the sweet corn process back for them to sell as a farm, and then some of it stayed there. So they really truly did a kind of cost share matching thing where the school district provided the majority of the labor in the facility, the farmer brought the product and some labor, and then they kind of figured out what was fair for what share of the final product each of them got to keep, or in fact the producer could be paid in kind for their product by giving them a free place to do some value added themselves. I think it's a great idea, and I'm sure Jeremy West would talk to you about it.
And this is actually, that's a great question. We do have examples of different districts that have done some very amazing things. And Jeremy's processing kitchen is a really important one here in Colorado. He's done a lot of bartering, not just with the farmers themselves, but he's also done bartering on processing with other schools. So Denver Public School farms their own land. They had a pilot project to do that, and they had a bumper crop of, guess what, zucchini. And they could not possibly process it themselves, and so they took it up to Jeremy. His school processed it all, his central kitchen, and bagged it into 1 pound bags and then froze, or maybe 1 cup, I'm not sure. Anyway, bagged it, froze it, and then sent back for payment the amount, or I should say they kept a certain amount as payment for processing and then sent the rest of the frozen back to DPS so that they could use it throughout the school year as they did. The other person mentioned they didn't get a planning grant but are advised to go for implementation. I guess I would say the same thing. The same idea is, honestly, if you ever are asked, if you ever are encouraged to go for a grant, do it, because not everybody's encouraged. That means they saw something really promising in you, so do it.
And I would not say big districts. Big districts sometimes have the best capacity to put the partnerships together you need, and if either of our organizations can help you with that, that might be it. But in fact, the current USDA is pretty gung-ho about wanting to get rural areas more supported. So I would say, even if that's true in the past, there is a very large push that I've seen that they want to get money out to rural areas. And I believe one of our big winners last year was Mancos, right? Was it Mancos?
Mancos,
and
which is
a
very
not a
small
big district. Yeah.
So, and the year before that,
see what their trick was.
Yeah, and Durango, which again is not a big district. We've actually seen quite a few that are not big districts. I think the biggest challenge for small districts isn't that they aren't competitive, because they're small. I think the challenge is that they may not, I'm going to make a big guess here, but I'm thinking they may not be as competitive simply because big districts have, they've got staff that can write these grants. And so sometimes they're just a lot better at writing grants, and they might end up, kind of snagging them because of that, which is kind of the whole reason we were doing this webinar and why we want to offer different kinds of resources. Nothing against the big districts. We want them to apply too, but it really is the small districts that we know don't have the same kinds of resources to support this kind of grant writing.
Thanks for all the good comments and questions.
Yeah, these are great.
Maybe it's time to wrap then. It looks like people are quieted down.
Yeah, okay. So please do fill out our survey. That will get you our ability to send you the templates if you would like them, whichever ones, and additional resources. And thank you so much for joining us today and hanging in there for the extra 15 minutes. Okay, you guys have a great time, and so good luck on your applications. Go for it, and we're really excited about it. Thanks, everyone.